This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you in association with Bayer Crop Science.
It's really easy to be slightly alarmed at the amount of land that looks like it needs to come out of production. They're talking about 18%, but that's by 2050. That's a long time, 25 years, and it's across a range of different uses.
The government unveils its long-awaited land use framework, what it means for your farm business. Concern for upland farmers shut out of two flagship agri-environment schemes. Red diesel prices reach new highs following the Iran war, and how one farmer is managing to make a profit despite all these challenges and more. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh. Broom.
Our top story this week: the vast majority of farmland must be managed differently to adapt to climate change, increase food production and reduce its environmental impact. So says the government's long-awaited land use framework, launched this week by DEFRA Secretary Emma Reynolds. The framework sets out a new plan to reshape how we protect and manage our land for long-term resilience and food security. Well, joining us now to discuss all that and more is Senior Land Use Policy Advisor Susan Twining of the Country Land and Business Association. Susan, welcome to the podcast. This framework, a long time coming, and almost everybody has responded to it in terms of reacting to it. Some good, some bad, a mixed reaction. You are largely positive. You think there could be some good to come out of it?
Well, I think it could be in the long run. I think there's good and bad. I mean, I think by implications, you often think that that's going to be bad implications, but I think there's actually some potential good comes out of this. I think the first thing to say is that the land use framework itself is quite strategic. So it's not going to have either an immediate or probably direct relevance to an individual business right now. So I think that is something to think about. You know, this is going to play out over the long term. It's going to set the direction of travel for land use. It sets out a vision for where the government would like to go. And I think for landowners, it's probably more likely to be the engagement at a local level. Some of the local nature recovery strategies, or when they put in a planning application, that's when the implications of the land use framework might start to show itself in the future.
Society asks so much of our farmers, Susan, not just to produce food, but also to look after the environment, to improve water quality, to ensure that we've got clean air. Is this framework an example of that? Is the government asking farmers to be environmental managers first and food producers second, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to read the land use framework and be slightly alarmed at the amount of land that looks like it needs to come out of production. They're talking about 18% of utilisable agricultural land coming out of production. But that's by 2050. That's a long time, 25 years. And it's across a range of different uses. There's about 6% of that land is for renewable energy and housing development. That's all stuff that will go through the planning system. The remainder of the 18% is land that it's more about how the land is managed. And a high proportion of that will be about probably some quite major land use changes in relation to tree planting and peatland restoration. So irreversible changes. So there's probably about half of that, sort of 9-10% is likely or anticipated to go in if the government's going to meet all the environmental targets, will go into permanent land use change. But the remainder is land use change as part of the farming system. So it will be things like putting in land use change that will be helpful to the environment, possibly quite helpful to some of the farming systems as well. So things like buffer strips and field margins and that sort of thing that will be part of the mix. So that's more integrated land use change with farming systems as part of a sustainable future. So I don't think it's quite as scary as it first looks. And if you think about that, if 18% of the agricultural land is forecast to come out of production, that does mean that 82% is going to remain in production. So I think if you flip it around the other way, it isn't about taking all land out of production. It's about doing things differently on some of it.
I see in the document that's been supplied to us that DEFRA say they're going to work with farmers on payments for a selection of SFI actions in the areas where they will have the greatest impact. And they envisage that coming in from 2027. How do you think that's going to go down?
I think targeting of government funding has been on the cards for some time, and some of it that's already happening to some extent. If you think about the landscape recovery schemes, there in certain geographical areas you apply, and then the certain ones are picked. Countryside stewardship higher tier is the same. It's only certain. It's a competitive scheme. Only certain schemes get in. Sustainable farming incentive clearly is slightly different. Our aim for it is for it to be accessible to everybody. But I think realistically, we do have to expect that there will be some targeting of it in order to ensure that we're getting really good value for money. And by delivering good value for money through the sustainable farming incentive, we will see that there's more longevity with the scheme. The document does say that there will be a lot of actions that will be available to everybody, but we're quite interested in understanding how the targeting will be done. We've already seen that coming through some of the local nature recovery strategies as well, that one of the purposes of those strategies at a local level is to help direct where public and private funding is likely to go. So I think there will be some alignment with the local nature recovery strategies and how this might be delivered. But yeah, we've still got to do that work with DEFRA, and I think it will be a really interesting discussion about how that's done and to ensure that it's done fairly.
You're confident, Susan, that farmers and landowners will still be the people that decide what they do with their land. This is not about the government telling farmers and landowners what to do.
Absolutely, and certainly that's quite an important facet for the CLA that remains the case. Clearly, if there are economic opportunities that will incentivise people or incentives from government that make it worthwhile changing, then that will allow people to change. But even if some people don't want to make the changes, even if it's economically advantaged, their business is their business and they should be making the decisions on their land. There may be circumstances where that will be different, but that would be very unusual. I would expect that to be very unusual.
A broadly positive response then from the CLA. Is there anything at all that you're concerned the framework won't deliver?
It's not going to deliver. It's not going to take away the contentious decisions on land use. And I'm probably particularly thinking there about some of the housing and the solar developments. It will to some extent, because there'll be some strategic mapping saying that this is the right place. But there's still going to be local upset, and there's still going to be people on both sides of the fence that don't agree with the development going there. And a lot of these decisions are judgment based. It's on a balance of trade-offs, and so inevitably it will come down to judgment. It isn't going to be a case of plugging in all the data and saying, haha, bingo, here's the answer. It will be about local judgment ultimately, and that's what the planning system is there for, to be fair.
Susan Twining from the CLA, the Country Land and Business Association. Thank you very much. Louise, as we said at the beginning of that audio, a long time coming, this land use framework. In your opinion, Louise, worth waiting for?
Well, good question. Was it worth waiting for? It is, at the end of the day, just another government document, and we've seen a fair few of those. But no, you're right. It has been a long time coming. There has been a lot of effort gone into that. A lot of people were consulted. I think even though it's now appeared, it's actually just the start, isn't it, of a national conversation about the best use of land and how we optimise the use of land. Relieved to see a few things in it. The first one being that it does very much make the point that England has enough land to meet all its priorities. So then we are looking at, food production, obviously a very important one. And And that has been protected in this document, but also nature recovery and renewable energy and providing homes and infrastructure and water management, all the things that our land has to do. For me, it's very obvious that farmers are going to be right at the heart of this because they will be the ones managing these multifunctional landscapes. So, that's a big, important thing. And this is supposedly going to help with some of the quite difficult decisions that are going to have to be made in the years ahead. So it's not suggesting that we won't have those decisions, but it's going to help make them and optimize the use of our land. So it's the vision, I think, that we have been lacking or missing for the last couple of years.
Hugh, we do live on a small island. We do ask a lot of our land. We do ask a lot of our farmers. The government's saying that food production is going to be maintained or even increased. And yet, if you delve into some of the numbers, 9% of farmland is going to shift towards climate and nature outcomes, things like habitat creation, carbon sequestration, with only limited food production. So are we really going to be able to increase production from less land, do you think?
I suppose the other way to ask the question is, are we farming all of our farmable land to its potential at the moment? And probably the answer is no, we're not. In fact, in a lot of cases, our output and our productivity is way below what it could be. So 9% is achievable, and it's perfectly possible that you could put 9% into all those things you talked about, so climate and nature benefits. Some of that you'll still get something off. I mean, I'd imagine there'll be, if you're restoring a lowland, heathland habitat, is there an opportunity to graze something on? And it does say small amounts of food could be produced on some of the land. But if you took that 9% out, it's more than possible to, massively increase the output of a lot of the other land that we have that we're still farming, and to do it in a way which doesn't impact the environment. So I think it is achievable, totally achievable.
Well, you're all very optimistic. Louise, I guess this is sustainable intensification, getting more from the same amount of land or even less land.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, one of the things that did really strike me when I was reading this document is that they said we have got enough land for all these priorities. And then the small print says, providing food production continues to increase in line with historic averages. So given the climate change threat and what's been coming down the line at us, you do just have to wonder a little bit about that. I mean, good example, we've had, depressed cereal yields for the last 2 years because of the weather. So we're going to have to up our game, I think.
You say depressed cereal yields for the last couple of years. We've seen a yield plateau across combinable crops largely over the past couple of decades.
Yeah, yields have plateaued. And if you look at, wheat yields, nothing exciting has happened about actual tonnage for, over 20 years. You could argue that efficiency has improved. So nutrient utilization, potentially producing slightly more off or producing more off less land. But in terms of tonnages per hectare, that's been relatively static. It's marginally gone up. But I think the key thing is here, this document, it points to, it's an ideas piece. It's a steering piece for policymakers. It's never going to settle all of the arguments, as we've heard from some of the contributors. It's never going to settle all the arguments between, solar panels and wheat and this, that, and the other. But it starts to break down, and it actually forms some form of a plan. And I think the key thing is, you're absolutely right, Louise, in terms of what you say about climate change impacting output. And these are based on averages from the last 30 years. And the last 5 years has been nothing like the last 30 years in terms of weather averages, rainfall, and everything else. The key thing here is there is a plan in place. And actually what you need to make sure is there's a feedback loop reviewing that plan while it is in place. And look, if the climate challenge becomes so great that you're starving because 9% of the land's being used for something that isn't food production, then you're going to have to take 5% out to up the food production. It's as simple as that. But it's a plan, And we haven't really had a plan before. And we haven't had any sort of, if you will, we've not, most businesses have KPIs, don't they? Key performance indicators to what you do, sales targets, whatever it is. What have we had in farming? I mean, we talk about, 61% self-sufficiency. We need to be more self-sufficient. We talk about, we need more Union Jacks everywhere and all this stuff. But actually, no one's saying, well, you need to up your game and you need to produce more off that really productive farmland that you're not doing. How productive are you as farmers? What is your environmental impact? How resilient are you? And this starts to join. It's quite vague, starts to join some of the dots.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now for a special message from this week's podcast partner, Bayer Crop Science, where I'm joined by Matt Siggs. So Matt, spring spray program's just around the corner. Let's talk about Bayer Crop Science's fungicide, which is going to make our lives easier this season.
That's right. If you're managing a cereals program, you know how complicated fungicide mixtures can get. So we've got Plaxium to cut right through that. It combines different active substances to help you fight diseases, promote crop health, and most importantly, protect your yield.
So let's look at what's inside then. Plaxium mixes 3 heavy hitters.
Yes, it includes actives Iblon, fluopyram, and prothioconazole. Now, the real magic here is that it uses multiple modes of action, specifically 2 SDHIs and a DMI inhibitor, to give robust control, but also sound resistance management. Think of it like a 1-2 punch.
And by hitting diseases from these different angles, it makes it harder for them to build up any resistance.
Region and timing play a part, but Plaxium allows you to be flexible in your approach, as it is truly a broad spectrum fungicide, which can be delivered either at T1 or T2 in the wheat programme, depending on what you need to prioritise.
Now, I've had a look and it looks like it's great against septoria, but not only that, it's also effective on yellow and brown rust.
Yes, Plaxium's usability fits perfectly at T1, covering septoria, yellow rust and stem-based diseases, while also performing strongly at T2, particularly where brown rust might be a concern.
And you've got some more good news too, Matt.
Correct. Unlike a lot of treatments that force you into a strict rotation, you can use all Iblon formulations, including Plaxium, in the same field year after year, as long as it's on an approved crop. It's just a reliable, repeatable solution for protecting your yield potential against those key diseases season after season.
Matt Siggs from Bayer Crop Science, thank you.
Use plant protection products safely by reading the label and following all the safety precautions. For more information, visit our website cropscience.bayer.co.uk or speak to your local contact.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, thousands of upland farmers in England face being shut out from 2 flagship agri-environment schemes. It comes after DEFRA confirmed there's no mechanism to include common land in 2026 Sustainable Farming Incentive or higher tier countryside stewardship agreements. Both DEFRA and the Rural Payments Agency say it's down to an IT issue with the Rural Payments Service, which means it cannot process applications for common land or shared grazing. We're joined now by Julia Aglianby, Executive Director of the Foundation for Common Land Charity, who says the situation must be resolved for upland farmers to achieve 2 of the key ambitions of the government's land use framework: delivery for nature and sustainable food production.
Yes, it seems extraordinary because if you go through the document, they're asking an awful lot from the uplands. Huge stress on upland peatland. These are areas where there could be more tree planting. We absolutely do more for nature to deliver the 30 by 30 targets that the government has signed up from. But at the same time, it's also come to light that common land will not be able to apply for sustainable farming incentive or countryside stewardship higher tier because the computer says no. So on the one hand, the government has these ambitious targets. On the other hand, it's not enabling the schemes so that farmers can deliver those targets. There seems to be a disconnect there between theory and practice.
And what's the answer? I mean, these are some of our most iconic, cherished landscapes. They have much to offer in terms of the environment and land management, and yet it doesn't seem like the uplands are getting a fair crack of the whip.
Well, there's a very easy solution, Johann. It's called offline manual systems. I'm not saying that we go revert to parchment and quill pens, but certainly with regard to common land, we know that the field parcels are very large, and that means that the Rural Payments Service computer system, Abaco Agri, can't cope with these large field parcels. It effectively crashes when they upload all the common land field parcels. So what we're suggesting is that they use spreadsheets, word processing packages, and PDF documents in order to have offline processing of commons. We know that commons make up 38% of our moorlands, so they're really important to deliver high quality water, to have climate resilience, and to make sure that we're having carbon storage and nature restoration in our uplands. So if we can't get this right, then we're not going to be delivering good value for the taxpayers.
Now, DEFRA says, Julia, that it is considering how common land can be incorporated into both the higher tier countryside stewardship scheme and the relaunched sustainable farming incentive. But you're saying up to 4,000 farmers face being excluded.
Well, they certainly are currently excluded. Unless they sort something out by June, they will be excluded. So we know that there are large areas of common land. Take an example such as Bampton Common. If you go over Shap, you see Bampton Common there, and it's a stunning piece of hillside. And the commoners there have already agreed to plant 500 hectares of scrub woodland there, and that's about 20% of their common. They've just today, the consultation period for that fencing and woodland has closed, and they would now like to go into a countryside stewardship hire scheme. But that is closed to them. So here are commoners wanting to continue farming and to be delivering for nature and carbon storage, and they are excluded. On the other side of the M6, it's Sedbergh, Brandfell, they're not in a scheme, and they would like to go in a scheme. And DEFRA have made it clear that they don't even know that the computer systems will be ready for 2027. Well, this is a national problem, and there are 3,900 commoners who claimed BPS. They say, yes, roughly 4,000. Three-quarters of those are in the uplands, and they are being excluded. And that just seems inequitable to me in terms of these farming businesses. And these are farming businesses which really depend on agri-environment payments for their continuation. We know that over 60% of their farm business income comes from agri-environment payments. And if they're not going to be able to access those schemes, then there's going to be problems going forward.
That's Julia Aglenby from the Foundation for Common Land. Hugh, a further blow, says Julia, to thousands of farming businesses, many of them in some of our most iconic landscapes.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff potentially in jeopardy, particularly at the moment with regards the way it's all moved on and hasn't moved on, and is leaving a lot of upland people scratching their head thinking, how do I actually access these schemes? It's a real mess. And we've known it's constant. It's been there constantly. It's a constant challenge still.
And Louise, this is due to a computer says no situation. The Rural Payments Services system simply unable to deliver in some of the places that it's needed most.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It's down to the IT systems at the RPA. It's extraordinary, isn't it? We're living in a, what do we call it, a technological age. And yet, obviously, the upgrades and the money just haven't gone into those systems. So I know the uplands are really badly affected by this, but actually anybody in a countryside stewardship higher tier scheme is working with the same issue in that the IT system just can't cope with them. So as Hugh said, it's a mess. It's an ongoing mess. We did discuss this a bit, didn't we, when we saw the DEFRA team at the NFU conference. They are aware of it. They're saying promising things about we're going to sort this out, but obviously that's going to take budget to get these IT systems sorted, and I'm not quite sure where we are with that at the moment.
We did indeed talk to the DEFRA team about this exact situation, just a few weeks ago. DEFRA says it is continuing to consider how common land can be incorporated into future schemes, including the possibility of simplified countryside stewardship higher tier agreements. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And as always, if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by a message to 88440. Now, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment, and we've had quite a few messages, quite a few questions asking why the price of red diesel seems to be increasing faster than the price of standard road diesel. Are suppliers making a fast buck by taking advantage of market volatility caused by the Iran war? Well, we thought we'd find out, and we phoned up Jess Corsair, head economist at the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board.
It's a complicated situation with red diesel, and there's a number of reasons behind this. So firstly, there are restrictions on red diesel in terms that there's much smaller supply produced within the UK now, and also less stocks held within the UK. So that means that we are more exposed to what's happening in global markets, global market volatility, what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. So we're buying in red diesel as we need it in the UK. So that's one of the things that is impacting red diesel prices. Also, the duty on red diesel is much lower than the diesel that we're buying on the forecourts. So that means that oil is making up a large percentage of the total price of the red diesel we're buying from farm. So that is contributing to kind of the volatility in prices and the higher prices there as well.
So what you're saying is, Jess, that the red diesel price is more sensitive to market volatility because the tax rate is much lower.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the contributing reasons, as well as the fact that we've just got lower stocks of red diesel within the UK as well. So we're buying in more as we need it rather than having stocks available.
That's Jess Corsair from the AHDB explaining why the market is so volatile and why red agricultural diesel is rising at a faster rate than white road diesel. But are people profiteering from the situation? Well, we thought we'd dig a little bit deeper, and we spoke to Patrick Crean, fuel procurement manager at the farmer-owned AF Group.
Before the 2nd of March, we probably saw red diesel around 70 pence a litre coming into the country before it's got any other form of cost on it. For example, margins for the wholesaler and margins for the suppliers and haulage costs. Product coming into the country right now is sat about 108 pence a litre. So probably to end user, red diesel is roughly 120 a litre, possibly a bit more. So when we're talking about a price of red diesel at £1.20 a litre, which is ex-VAT, and potentially some petrol stations that we're seeing at 150, 160, which includes VAT, it is worth noting there is no discrepancy in red diesel and white diesel prices. There is the same amount that the prices have moved in tangent. So, there's been a lot of words mentioned, of one being profiteering. There isn't profiteering. It's just there are different contracts in place with forecourts. A lot of the forecourt prices are contracted. They have a lot of contracts running with the terminals and their suppliers. Buying off the spot market, there are no contracts. So it's the same differential between red diesel and white diesel now than there was at the beginning of the month.
So no profiteering then, Patrick, but it is a busy time of year. Fieldwork is kicking on as the weather gets warm. People need red diesel to do that fieldwork. What are you advising your farmer members?
There's not a lot to say other than we just have to give them the picture of what's going on at the moment. A lot of the discussion is around, do I order right now? The plain answer is it really depends on what you want to do. If you are happy to pay £1.20 a litre for red diesel, then absolutely get it ordered. A lot of the questions that we get are, what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of weeks? Well, the first answer is it's almost impossible for us to actually have any sort of advice because really we have no idea. The simple answer is if there are oil headlines in the news, I'm afraid that is bad news for the oil markets. So Whether it's a question of ordering now or 2 weeks or 3 weeks down the line, I'm afraid it's impossible to say. Given history of Russia-Ukraine, we will see the prices come back. But for now, whilst the war seems like it isn't going to end at the moment and energy sites are being hit across the Middle East, we are going to see continued increases, at least for now.
And you'll have your contracts in place with your suppliers too, Patrick?
We've got contracts in place with our suppliers to basically make sure they're not making any more than they should be. So we're covered for our farmers, but it's so hard to kind of paint a clear picture when there's just so much news going on and so much press, and it's really hard to get a clear point across.
That's Patrick Crean from the AF Group, doing everything it can to get fuel at a fair price to its farmer members. Louise, fieldwork well underway. This fuel situation becoming more serious by the day.
Yes, it is, and not just for farming either. But anyway, Hugh, these prices have gone up. There's obviously going to be, if there isn't already, a supply issue. I don't really know when the end of this is going to come, so we're all a bit reliant on Donald and what he's deciding to do. But it is really concentrating people's minds. It's being talked about everywhere that I go. We are recording this currently. I'm sitting in a very, very cold office because we're obviously off-grid here, so we're dependent on heating oil, and all these things are just a spanner in the works that farming doesn't really need at the moment.
Hugh, you having any issues getting fuel?
I'm supposedly there's some on the way. I've probably really stupidly, given what's happened the last 24 hours, went for the. It's like playing pontoon, isn't it? You can either have it 10 days time at this price, or you can take it, have it sooner, but your price is on the day, and if you're lucky, it might go down or it might go up. So it seems to be. No one said that they can't get any that I've heard of, but it's slowly chonking out. I think the big problem with diesel's the big problem, isn't it? And the reason diesel is the big problem, there's two reasons. There's the issue around the fact that the red diesel, obviously, it's different from the DERV, so they have to put the dye in it, and obviously they use less of it now since all the rules changed. Was it 3-4 years ago when all the building sites couldn't use red and they had to go onto the DERV? So that's, I suppose, a supply chain challenge because you're only making so much with red dye in. So that's an issue. But the main thing to remember about diesel, and we discussed this, and I had to reignite my conversation with Morris, the retired petrochemical engineer who cycles through the farm. And I actually interrupted him on his breakfast on his German riverboat cruise near Bonn this morning to refresh my brain. And as Morris says, diesel, so petrol is really easy to get out of the refinery regardless what oil you're refining, because it's so light, it just almost, this is a bit of a simplification, it floats off the top. Diesel, on the other hand, is a lot harder, and depending on what your source oil is that you're refining means that you've got to change all your kit round to accommodate. So you'll remember when Ukraine happened and the flow of Russian diesel stopped because everyone boycotted it. That had we were buying a shed load of diesel from the Russians, and also the European refineries that were making diesel were buying loads of Russian oil, and they were all geared up for that Russian oil for turning it into diesel. You can't just go and buy, in that case, a load of Arabian oil and put it in, or a load of North Sea, because it's very different. Some's sweeter, some's wetter, some's got more water in it. Russian oil is really watery, whereas North Sea and actually Saudi Arabian, the Middle Eastern oil, is what they would say is really sweet. It doesn't have much impurity in it. So it's a whole challenge. So that is why we're seeing these crunches. Some may say there's profiteering going on, there's this going on, there's that going on, but there is a physical reason and a chemical and scientific reason why we're seeing these challenges. But what it shows is how utterly reliant we still are on big, massive oil tankers chonking around the world to power our lives.
You have to wonder, don't you, then, really, whether it's time to get these ethanol plants firing again. I mean, I think they were only mothballed, as a technical term, weren't they? They weren't actually taken down and dismantled. So, is it time that we got those going again and started putting wheat into those?
Well, it would be great, wouldn't it, in terms of underpinning potentially the wheat price. But as I say, the downside is the ethanol is more like petrol. You can't put it in your kerosene tank, Louise, and take your jumper off, and you can't run tractors on it at the moment. So the market is probably limited at the moment. Perhaps if it gets really scary and we're seeing crazy oil prices, perhaps that may become an option. But at the moment, the big problem is diesel supply.
Yeah, those ethanol plants on the east coast of England credited with putting a floor in the market for UK wheat. That is, until a trade deal with the US. That man again, Donald Trump, allowed ethanol from the United States into the UK duty-free. That is the market for red diesel put to rights. Hugh, the rest of the markets, what's happening there this week?
Thank you very much, Johann. Finished cattle price this week, finished the average deadweight 635.5. That's dropped back just under a penny on the week. The live weight goes back to 369.6. That's actually gained a couple of pence on the week. Interestingly, if you look at those beef prices, a year ago, those beef prices were actually higher, 665. We were getting towards those record highs we hit last May. And the live was at 372. Sheep price still really strong. In fact, it's just rocked this week. We said about some real spikes in the market last week, but if we look at the SQQ, the deadweight, 799.7. That's a massive rise. That's up nearly pretty much 48p on the week. The live weight goes up about nearly 20p on the week to 409 dead. Pig price, not great. It's dropped back another 0.1 of a penny. The SPP average 184.5. And then to the arable markets, despite all that's happening in the world, there's not much happening with the arable markets. 164.9 is this week's spot on feed wheat. That's gone up a pound. You got a pound ahead of yourself there than you were if you'd waited to this week. Milling wheat 176.5, 176.50. That's gained £1.50 on the week. Feed barley has gained about a pound, £152.50. Oilseed rape 437.60. That's actually gone back £2. Feed peas 205 dead. Feed beans 204.60. That's actually gone back £2. And then to the all-important diesel price, it's here. So on the Wednesday morning ring round, 111.13. This week, I've had people paying 104, up as high as 120. And of course, it's back to this whole thing of whether you gamble, you go forward, wait a long time, or you go short and you gamble. And with the spikiness in the market, and just today, the day we're recording this podcast, the oil price has gone up from at one stage. It hit very early this morning when the news came out about the bombings of the oil installations in the Gulf. It hit sort of 106, 107. And now it's back down to about 106. It's dropped $10 just in a day. So it's so volatile. But I say the average for Wednesday, 111.3. Who knows where that will be when we get to next week.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, we're really conscious here on the Farmers Weekly podcast that UK agriculture is going through some tough times. We never want to gloss over the big issues, but we do always like to end each episode where we can on a positive and hopefully uplifting note. This week, Louise was fortunate enough to meet Jeff Homer from Homer Farming in Wiltshire, who is making a good go of things despite all the challenges farming faces.
Jeff Homer, Homer Farming from Marlborough, Wiltshire. Mixed farming, family business, spread over 3 sites. So we've got 2 tenanted dairy farms, 1 autumn block and spring block, and then a contract farmed arable and autumn dairy. We've never owned an acre. For me, I enjoy farming on tenancies and especially contract farming because it drives the thought process of having to make profit, to make money for not just us, but for 2 parties. And it feels like we've got to be as good farmers as possible. Future-wise, I think with the change of government thought processes and SFI reducing and changing, that there will be opportunities coming forward for businesses that are open-minded to contract farming or tenancies. And for us, we're reducing inputs to be able to cope with the changing climates and milk price dropping, grain price dropping, and we can stay profitable in those periods. So for me, the future is more of what we're doing and really look on cost of production.
And you talked about reducing inputs and costs as much as possible. Can you just give us a little bit more detail on what you're doing?
So with the dairies, we've pushed reducing inputs, pushed mainly by our system, allowing us, we've got the genetics and the breeding to be able to push grazing as hard as we can to produce as much milk as we can from grazed grass or homegrown forage, which is then allowing us to reduce purchase inputs. We're now pushing further by integrating the arable crop, adding premium to our arable crops by milling them at home and feeding them back through the dairies, which is then reducing purchase concentrate. And we're questioning everything we put into the dairies, so all variable inputs that we put in. So whether it's how we buy our dairy chemicals for cleaning the plant, how we utilise them to fly control, wormers, it all gets questioned, and we look at everything. And then to the arable side of it, the biggest step change for us was finding an agronomist that is on the same wavelength. And it's the same with the dairy, is finding a vet that suits your system. And surround yourselves with positive-minded people that want to achieve the same as you. But going back to the arable, we've reduced nitrogen input by our system, by being able to do foliar feeding and melting our own urea with the turn fert machine, which in time, because we've reduced our nitrogen, we're then reducing other inputs like the pH is more stable, so we're not having to lime as much. And we're using, inputs, so fungicides have dropped dramatically, and integrating livestock, so sheep grazing all our crops to reduce on fungicides and growth regulators.
And just coming back, you mentioned the tow and fert machine, very topical at the moment given what's happening in the Middle East. You gave us some figures. I think you're melting your own urea and applying it through that machine. Can you just remind me what those figures were, how much you're saving on that nitrogen?
So I haven't done the figures for what new prices will be from what's happened in the Middle East, but sort of last season, so historically we were buying IBCs of polymer ureas, and they were equating to about £2.20, £2.25 per litre. But we're buying urea in and melting it ourselves with a turn fert machine, putting in depreciation, fuel, labour and everything. It was costing us about 70p a litre.
So about a third of the cost that you otherwise would have been paying?
Yeah, about a third of the cost. And it's, what the product is because you're doing it on farm, and it's the cheapest way of buying nitrogen basically in bagged urea. And we know what we're making. We can add other ingredients into our foliar mix that you may not be able to do with the polymer ureas.
That's Wiltshire farmer Jeff Homer of Homer Farming talking to Louise. Louise, good to hear somebody doing well in these troubled times. Jeff, modest with it too, not crowing about it, working hard, thinking outside the box and keeping a strict lid on costs.
Yeah, I mean, yes to both of those things. It really is good to hear someone where, they're making more profits, or that particular farm that we were on is making more profits than it ever has. And Jeff's just, really concentrating his mind. I mean, he admits he's had to really make some step changes, and there's been different things that he's introduced over the years that have done that. He also really does pay tribute to his agronomist and his vet, who he said really important to have people on board who share your vision and know what you want to do and help you get there. And he also pays tribute to his staff, of which there are 13 full-time staff. So it's a dairy and an arable business, and on 3 different sites. So he's very much saying it's not all about him. It's teamwork, and he's actually really enjoying what he's doing. And when you have to make money for 2 parties, if you like, in a sort of contract farming agreement or whatever, he said that drives your thought processes really, and you have no choice but to be a good farmer. So it was a really interesting day at the farm, and I really enjoyed it there.
And not owning an acre, Hugh, that really focuses the mind.
Yeah, it does. Any tenant farmer listening to this knows that. They live with that 24/7. You have to be on it. And it's so common to find phenomenally farm tenanted land because I say you've got to be on it. And it's back to what we were talking about earlier, isn't it? When we were talking about the land use framework and the fact that they want to cut the agricultural land area by 9%, and they're confident that we can make up any shortfalls by just farming better. And this exemplifies that perfectly. If everyone farmed as well as this, we could even give up even more land, couldn't we? It's a bit like years ago. I remember going to a grazing. There was a parliamentary group talking about grazing and grassland and what it contributed. And there was a figure, one of the guys from Queen's University in Belfast, very eminent professor, whose name escapes me, stood up and he'd done this calculation that if every grassland farm was able to grow an extra ton of dry matter per hectare during a growing season, it was the equivalent of about 1.9 billion to the industry in terms of value based on the cost of dry matter. And when you think about it, that's, you just manage your grassland right. That's actually quite easy to achieve. Obviously, in climatically challenged years, it could be more challenging. But it just goes to show you've got to get it right, get the attention to detail right, and everything else sort of looks after itself to a degree. But it is possible, and it's great to hear someone upbeat and having a great time doing it as well.
Yeah, attention to detail, something we're always striving for here on the Farmers Weekly podcast, and a bit of positivity too, and some forward-looking thinking from our nation of fantastic farmers. That is it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do leave us a 5-star review. That's it. Until next week, when we'll bring you all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. For now, though, until next week, I'm Johann Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening. This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you in association with Bayer Crop Science.